which means then you will run into a wall of a weight that you can lift. And you're limiting your overall progress on the movement because of that disproportionate resistance profile. How do we combat that? The side delts are a body part that have incredible recovery capabilities. And regardless of your training split approach, they're a body part that I actually would always look to tag on at additional frequency, just because of their recovery capabilities. And then if you're having a question as to why they're a body part that is able to recover so easily, if you were doing an arm session, the very first exercise, the very first set of the session, the best possible movement you could probably do would be a chained dip, where then, and that lockout, the overload is there, where you've got loads of lockout strength. But in a session like this, as you get on with more fatigue, that would be the worst possible. And again,
se você deseja consultoria de qualidade, vem pro time Music.
What is up, guys? So today I'm training push. I'm going to talk you through the way that I personally like to structure my push sessions at the moment, and that certainly does vary, but my preference is to cluster my pressing movements together. Now there's two kind of camps to approaching a push session, in the sense that you could train your chest first and then do a chest isolation movement. Then you could train your shoulders second with a shoulder compound movement, and then a shoulder isolation movement after that. And then you could finally move around to your tricep compound movement and then finish with your tricep isolation. I personally don't like that approach. I know many people that have had great success with it. For me, I found the best route to success when you are training a push session is to do your chest work first, your compound shoulder work second, your compound tricep work third, and then move on to your isolation movements. And the reason being is that if you think that if I do a chest fly second, and then I come to do my high incline Smith press, that would then maybe be my shoulder movement, the fatigue that will come about in my upper chest fibers from my chest fly is going to negatively impact the loading that I can use on my shoulder press. And then furthermore, if I then do a lateral after that, when I circle back round to doing my tricep compound, I've now done a chest isolation and a shoulder isolation, which is going to negatively impact my ability to load my tricep compound move. When we understand the fact that loading and our ability to progress our loading is what will underpin our overall mass, in theory, in the sense that if we are able to always bring about an increase in internal stimulus as a result of the increase in external stimulus, what I mean is as more weight goes on the bar, our muscle fiber stimulus increases, which should happen if you're executing efficiently, then the more we lift, the bigger we get. And we see that in everything, in that the biggest bodybuilders of all time have also been the strongest, or also will have the ability to be the strongest. Now, I know in the comment section here, we're gonna say, well, what about so-and-so? There are outliers. However, when we traditionally look at the biggest that carried the most amount of muscle mass, Ronnie Coleman, probably the strongest bodybuilder of all time. Now, who would be kind of next on that list as really freaky big bodybuilders? Kai Green, again, unbelievably strong, can incline press 5 plates. And then we move to an outlier, Phil Heath. Maybe not as strong, because his ability to build muscle was so crazy freaky, he didn't have to lift heavy. But then the number of bodybuilders that are extremely big, that are strong, far outweighs the outliers. So when we kind of look at modern time bodybuilders, two prime examples of kind of the biggest, the strongest would be even Andrew Jacked, who's just won 2 shows, absolutely ginormous, unbelievably strong. And then we think, who else is in that top 3? James Hollingshead, one of the strongest bodybuilders of all time. And then we kind of look at then kind of top 10 Olympia, Ian Valliere, again, unbelievably strong. It's consistent in the sense that the loading aspect will bring about great hypertrophy. So when I think about a push session, how do I get my compound moves the strongest? I bunch them together at the beginning, and I don't use isolation work that will then diminish my ability to load and progress my loading. That doesn't mean that you have to do it in that manner. I would advise you trying both ways and seeing what feels the best for you and what allows you to make the best progress over time. Because as per the educational videos, there is no best. The best is what feels best for you. and my way might not be the best way for you. And I'm never going to tell you that my way is the best way for you, but my goal is to give you the different approaches that you can use, and then you take what you need and you apply it to yourself. And then you've got your way, and that is the best way. I'm going to start with incline prime press today. I'm going to talk you through how to adjust the resistance profiles, because I get these questions a lot. Now, previously when I was using the incline prime press, I was focusing on just middle peg loading. Now, the reason for that is because it, again, in theory, will keep the resistance even through the whole profile. That's not actually the case with this piece. And even when you are just middle peg loading, it will overload the short slightly more, which means then when we get to that lockout period, that gets disproportionately harder as we progress our lifts, which means then you will run into a wall of a weight that you can lift, and you're limiting your overall progress on the movement because of that disproportionate resistance profile. How do we combat that? We then split our loading, even on early sets, between the top and the middle pegs, which means it keeps the ability to progress lifts consistent over a long period of time. Now, I came across this through trial and error, in the sense that I probably spent about 2 years solely trying to progress the middle peg, and I couldn't get above 5 and a bit plates aside for 8 reps. I just couldn't. Despite everything else progressing consistently as I would hope, it was as if I just couldn't overcome this shortening factor. I was just running into a brick wall. So then, once I realized that, that's when I decided to start splitting the resistance profile. And the where you would split your resistance profiles varies from piece to piece. So as I work towards my working sets, I'll explain how I like to now load this machine. And then you can try it and see how it feels for you. So as I warm up on this, I'm going to increase my mid peg and my top peg at the same time. So I'm going to go up in half a plate on each. So for my first working set, I actually like to go 50-50 now, or maybe 60% on the middle peg and 40% on the top. But I won't go above now 60% on the middle. For me personally, I don't like the limiting factor that will bring to your ability to progress the load across the machine as a whole. It took me much longer than it should have done to actually come to that conclusion. Like I said, I was hammering that middle peg for 2 years. It's because I'm stubborn as fuck. And I was like, I'm going to get this to like 10, 12 reps for the 5 plates on the middle peg. Just couldn't do it. It took me, I would say, a year just to get from 5 reps to kind of like 7 reps. And then another half a year to get to 8 reps. Very, very frustrating. I cost myself progress in terms of development whilst I was still trying to build muscle. If I'd have just gone through more sensible loading like I do now in terms of my ability to progress and create that additional internal stimulus. As I'm warming up, you'll notice that I don't waste energy on my warm-ups. I don't do very many reps on things that I have no intention of taking to failure. All I'm doing as I'm warming up is preparing my body for the work. If I waste energy on it, I can then get less from the sets that are going to contribute to my development and my growth. So for those of you that are warming up, do the absolute minimum that you need to rather than work. For some of you, it might need more reps because you're going to then avoid the potential risk of injury. For me, it will only be 2, 3 reps and then single reps until I'm then ready to do my work set. I have 2.5 plates, middle and top. This now feels incredibly even through the whole lift. And what I mean is that the loading here feels just as heavy or just as light as it does here, which is important because on a lot of machines, specifically maybe hammer strength machines, they will have quite little resistance here in the lengthened position, and then they will fully overload the shortened position. which I believe is a poor resistance profile, which is why you don't see any hammer strength machines in my gym. The advantage of the prime pieces, and this isn't plugging prime because we didn't get these at any kind of discount. I just think they're great machines. We can adjust that resistance profile. So right now, I'm going 50-50 and it keeps everything even. Now that I'm ready to work, guys, I'm going to stick on 5 plates total on the machine. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start with that slight increase on the middle peg. Like I said a second ago, we might potentially work at 60-40. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to have 3 plates on the middle and 2 plates on the top. Now, the question then is, why would I potentially overload the shortened first? And the reason being is that whilst we're fresh, that's where we're going to retain our strength in the shortened position. So if I'm going to make the most of that lockout period, this will be where I do it on my first set. So I either will go 50-50 or I'll go 60-40, depending on how I feel whilst I'm warming up. So based on those warm-ups, I'm going to start on that 60-40 and then I'll adjust for my second set, because as we get more fatigued, that's where we lose the ability to overload in the shortened. And then again, that's where we need to adjust the resistance profiles. And that's again why a machine like a hammer strength is so obsolete, because as you get fatigued, you're still then limited in terms of the loading that you can use by what you can get in the shortened. So as you get deeper and deeper into a session and more fatigued, then is really absolutely no use for a hammer strength piece at all. If you are going to use them, I would only use them in the first exercise that you do. After that, I wouldn't use them at all, and I'd use things that only have even resistance profiles if you don't have access to something that allows you to manipulate the resistance profile. The rep range that you choose is going to be entirely person dependent. If you aren't used to lifting extremely heavy, I would stick to safer rep ranges. And if your goal is solely hypertrophy, again, I would probably stick to things that are maybe in the 8 to 12 rep range. It's a great rep range to work. Equally, you are going to get fantastic results by lifting in maybe the 5 to 30 rep range, because as long as you take something to absolute failure, you're going to bring about an adaptive response. For me personally, just because you're maybe going to question why I'm going to go so heavy, because I'm probably going to only get 3 reps on this, maybe even only 2 reps. My personal goals right now are to be as strong as I possibly can be, and I'm actually not hugely concerned with my muscle mass anymore, because the next competition I do won't be in bodybuilding, or it'll be in jiu-jitsu, and where I want to actually be even lighter than I am now, but still as strong as I possibly can be. I'm only literally explaining that because you might be wondering why I'm going to go so heavy and do so little reps, and unless your goals are the same as mine, I probably would avoid doing doubles and triples. With your goal being specifically bodybuilding and hypertrophy, lift a little bit lighter and get a few more reps. Adjustment for my second set, because I know I'm not going to have the same power in the lockout, but I will still have the exact same power in the lengthened position. I'm going to move from 3 plates to the middle to 3 plates at the top, which then gives me that I still stay on 5 plates on the machine, but my ability to load in that shortened position is now diminished. But our muscles retain strength in the lengthened position phenomenally well. So again, this is my argument against reverse banding machines, because, or reverse banding, basically anything aside from a hack squat. Your you don't want to diminish your load in the lengthened position, and that you only want to overload the shortened position when you're very fresh. So again, the only situation where I potentially would reverse band a movement would be the very first set of a whole workout. After that, I wouldn't do it. And that applies to basically everything. Again, people can have mixed opinions on that. Even people that I adore, like Joe Bennett, we don't entirely see eye to eye with the reverse banding setup. Unless your setup of the reverse band is immaculate, where then I can see some potential value in it. The problem being is that I don't see people setting up their reverse bands appropriately, which then makes the exercise obsolete, because like I said, you're limiting yourself to your load on the bar by the amount that you can lift in the shortened position, and then you're dropping off your loaded position stuff. So that's, again, one of the main reasons why I don't like it. Kind of regardless of your goals, guys, still get up for sets however you like. Some people like getting up for sets, some people don't. Some people need to get up for sets, some people don't. I personally still like to get fucking up for sets. In my head, I still want to attack the set. For me, being aggressive in the sets will be something I always do because I enjoy doing it. Some people don't, and that's okay. So, do whatever you've got to do to make progress. So guys, if I was to do more volume here, I would then, again, drop off the loading on the mid peg and go more to the top peg. So what I would do if I was sticking on this is that I would go 1.5 plates on the middle, and then I'd go 3.5 on the top. And I'd get another treble again. But that's all I'm doing for chest compound, because I want to now move on to my shoulder compound movement. And if I did more volume here, I would then take away from my ability to be strong on my shoulder press volume. So for me right now, I only need 2 sets of compound chest work. When I was at my absolute biggest and strongest, there sometimes would be a third, but because of the way I see push sessions as a whole, in the shoulder press movement, because it's a high incline, we're still pulling upper chest fibers. There's still chest stimulus from that, but then in that one, there's just more anterior delt stimulus. And equally in the tricep compound movement, there's still decline chest fibers. You're still going to recruit various aspects of your chest through this motion, through this motion, through this motion. So really, actually, there's 6 compound sets that I'm going to do that will target my triceps, my chest, and my shoulders. But just the varying positions that I take will bias the recruitment of those 3 muscles that I'm trying to do. So that's the way that I look at a push session, is that actually it's 6 sets of compound work that will hit all 3, and then just slightly adjusting the angles as to what bias we get. And like I said, if I did an additional set here, I would take away from the amount of bias and effort that I can put into my next movement. It's not the must way to do things, but I believe it to be a very effective way. So next I'm going to choose the high incline Smith. I'm a little bit smaller than when I last did this movement, so my setup feels a little strange. But this has an even resistance profile. So the resistance that you get at the top is not more than the bottom, which is perfect for this movement. The only kind of negative to this piece would be that it doesn't converge. So in terms of kit selection, probably my absolute favorite that I would pick here would be the Atlantis shoulder press, as the handles being ones that slightly turn your hands out, and then with a slight converging aspect, I believe we'll get the best recruitment of the upper pec fibers and the shoulder fibers. But then this would be probably my second favorite. I actually prefer this to the prime shoulder press. And the reason being is because the prime shoulder press is a complete vertical press. So it's more like a behind the neck shoulder press. Whereas this allows me to tie in my upper pec fibers so that then I can approach the session as a whole. Now, what would potentially be an even better movement than this, which is what I used to do, would be the high incline dumbbell press variation, because that allows you to converge. If you have someone to pass you up the dumbbells, then that's probably what I would pick. And if you look back to kind of my 2017 videos, where I was again at my strongest on that, I was incline dumbbell pressing the 80 kilo dumbbells. So whatever that is in pounds, 175 pound dumbbells, around that, 180 pound dumbbells. So now, because we're in here, for ease, I would then use the Smith machine. And again, I'm going to dead stop this movement just to take out the stretch reflex in the bottom position of the movement. Play with dead stopping because it's going to standardize your pressing. What I mean by that is that every rep has to be exactly the same. And you cannot generate that stretch reflex force out the bottom. And it's not to say that's a bad thing, it's just that through different stints, utilize dead stops and then utilize your standard presses. Right guys, so that's the volume done for that upper shelf portion. And then now I'm actually going to go back onto the prime incline and I'm going to now really exaggerate the tuck of my elbows to focus on a narrow grip press. Now, if I had a flat version, I'd probably choose that now at this point, but I don't. So I'm using incline again, but the reason being is because at this point now, my shoulders, chest and triceps are fatigued when it comes to my press ability. So right now, this would be the worst point possible for me to use a piece of kit that overloads in the shortened position, because I'm going to be entirely limited in terms of how much stimulus I can apply here by how much force I can produce here. And considering I still have lots of strength left here in this position, that would be a really poor choice to use a piece of machine that then doesn't allow me to adjust my resistance profile. Now, for those of you that don't have resistance profile pieces that can be adjusted, again, I would probably do a flat, narrow grip Smith, or I would use a standard dip machine, or depending on how your body feels with them, standard free weight dips. But if you can use something that has an adjustable resistance profile, this is where then lengthening pretty much solely in the top peg or the lengthened position of the resistance profile is going to allow you to use the most amount of load where you're still strongest, which is here, and then drop off where you're then actually now pretty weak and fatigued, which is here. One. So guys, tricep focus, tucked elbows during the eccentric portion of the lift, focusing on loading what we're really trying to target. So again, my goals are somewhat different to yours, but I'm still doing this video with the focus on your goals. And mentally, I'm loading my triceps. So during that eccentric portion, I am really dialed in on what I am trying to grow. So guys, grip-wise, if we check out how I've taken my grip here, I've used a suicide grip in the sense that I haven't wrapped my thumb. So my hand is really in on the U-bend. So when I was kind of doing chest focus, my hand wasn't as far over as this, it was then more there. I still don't actually grip my thumb on the chest press either, but for that one, I had my hand all the way tight, which just allowed me to just keep that tight elbow path, just to focus on my triceps. So now for the 6th set, this is again where I'll adjust the resistance profile one more time, and I'll only load in the lengthened position. This would be my last compound set, unless I feel like my recovery capabilities would allow for something additional after this. And then usually I decide that kind of at this point in the session with how I'm feeling and how my week's gone, and how much volume I can get away with in reflection to my frequency that I'm training at, and then equally my intensity as well. So for kind of the insight into your volume aspects, please check out the education series in the 2nd video where I talk about the kind of amount of volume relative to the frequency that you can do. And we're obviously going to explore more on that topic, but today you get an insight to 6 sets with which would be kind of like my standard volume, and then I might do more or less for my compound work depending on my recovery capabilities. We have a lot to cover in those videos. Like I said in the introductory video, I want to make sure that you guys are fully armed with all of the information possible to make the best decisions possible for your training. I keep explaining about rep ranges over and over and over, but how much am I going to bet that one of the reoccurring themes in the comment section of this video is people critiquing the ultra low reps. So we're just using this opportunity to circle back and remind ourselves again that my goals are not the same as your goals, which are not the same as Corin's goals, which are not the same as Jay's goals behind the camera, because Jay is Mr. Wales bodybuilder, so his goals are going to be slightly different in the sense that he's going to lift more reps than I am. And make sure you're training specific to your goals, which are going to be individual. Mine are different to yours, mine are different now versus then, and different to a different period of time. So guys, that set was a perfect example of where you saw the weight stick. Now imagine I didn't have a machine in that moment that dropped off in resistance as I got to my weakest portion of the lift. You saw that the lift got hard here and I had to drive through it. If I was on a machine that overloaded the shortened aspect, so for example, let's say I was using a dip that had a chain on it, that meant that as I got closer to the fully contracted part, the resistance increased, I would not complete the rep, because that's disproportionate to the strength that our muscles hold in their resistance profiles, in their strength profiles. So this is that last rep there was a perfect example of intelligent exercise selection and using resistance profiles that match our strength profiles to optimize progress. I'm not going to do any additional compound volume, but I will kind of give you an insight into what I would do if I was going to add more. Like if I was to add more at this point, I would probably do a dip machine, and again, just focus on the lengthened portion. But how I would approach that movement would be to try to tie in my chest and my triceps and my shoulders by kind of getting quite over the machine and then contracting everything. Like that's if I was to add additional volume. But I'm not, I'm happy with my 6 sets of work, and this is where I'm going to move on to my isolation components. And again, my volume for here will scale up or down based on my frequency and then based on the intensity aspects that I'm using, which right now are actually none. It's just straight sets to the point where I can't complete a rep without additional help. And then the overall aspect will be reflective of my recovery capabilities depending on the things I previously mentioned, my caloric surplus or deficit, my sleep, my recovery, my hydration, all the things that we've kind of covered in the first 2 educational videos that I've talked about. So circle back to those, get yourself up to date with those, just so you can kind of stay in touch with the things that I'm going to talk about mid-session, so you're always on board. And then if you have any questions, if anything I've said is confusing, ask. We'll make sure we get it all ironed out, and that at any point things are very clear. During this kind of these video series, there'll be kind of Q&A sessions interspersed, and we'll do those live, and we'll make sure that everyone has all the information that they need to keep moving forward. I'm now on to the prime pec deck. Now, how I actually like to use this is setting 1 to start with. And that's loading evenly through the resistance profile. Now, the reason why I don't go straight into just solely overloading the lengthened position is I feel like on an isolation movement, I actually can kind of reset the way I feel in terms of getting things short. So I actually do still feel like when it's just focusing on contracting the chest as hard as I can, that I do still then actually have some oomph in this position. I've tried all different ways. I've tried solely going to just training the lengthened position, and I actually then was able still to progress my lifts when I am focusing on setting 1 here. Now, would I have continued to use setting 1 if I felt like I wasn't able to make progress? No. So my logbook gives me my feedback in terms of smart exercise selection. So like I said to you, with the prime press, I couldn't overcome just mid-peg loading. So then that was an indicator that the resistance profile selection was wrong, because your logbook will always tell you what is right or wrong. Because if at certain points your volume is too high or your recovery capabilities are too low, or a combination of the two, your logbook will stop progressing. And then that's where you then need to look back on what you're doing and understand, okay, which area is wrong. So for me now, setting 1 for my chest isolation on the prime is where I would start. Why I don't like setting 4 or 2 in this point is I feel like there's just no resistance in the lengthened aspect at all. And then you're kind of just, it's only at this point that you start to feel any kind of resistance, and then I don't like the way that feels. For you, maybe try that and see how that feels. For me, I didn't really feel like I was getting anything out of the set when the tension only kind of kicks in at this point, and I feel like I'm only getting resistance from here to here. That for me, I think is nonsensical when we're exerting effort and we only have so much effort that we can exert, in the sense that we can only do so much volume relative to our frequency. We want to use our volume wisely. So guys, you saw the aspect in which I failed. It was here. Because I've gone setting one, which means the resistance is slightly harder here than it is here. And equally, we're weaker here than we are here, especially as the session progresses. As the session progresses more and more, we are increasingly weaker here and retaining strength here. But I felt like I had enough oomph to justify that setting one to get to here. Now what I wanted to make sure was that once I got to this point, I didn't adjust my form just to get the rep closed, okay? Because I could feel once I got to rep 8 that I was starting to lean into the reps more to get things short. Try to keep the reps standardized, okay? Full contraction of the muscle is what's key. And when you do that, focus on driving your humerus, your upper arm together. It isn't just about getting your hands closed, because I can actually create an angle here where I close my hands, but I'm not fully shortening the pec. That is fully shortening the pec. Here. I'm going to adjust the resistance profile to just overload now and the lengthen, because when I get to this point here, I need the exercise to drop off to allow me to get it fully short. Now, what do you do if you don't have something that adjusts here? This is where you're going to have that manual help, okay? So, once you get to this point and you can't fully get it short, someone's going to do that work slightly with you. And you might just do 2 reps, just getting it fully short with some additional hands-on work. So guys, one of the main differences you'll have noticed between that section of the workout and the first part, my reps were higher. And that really is actually just for a safety thing. I'm happy to drop my reps on subsequent sets, but for isolation movements, I typically will actually lift things in slightly higher reps compared to my compound movements on the first set. I will be happy to do 6 to 8 reps on subsequent sets, but I won't go below 5 reps very often on an isolation movement unless I fucked up my loading. So the risk to reward benefit is just simply not there, so I can't justify it. For maximal strength work on my compound movement, 100%, because I'm trying to be literally as strong and as explosive as I can be. That's my sole goal. But for this, because I am extremely conscious of my rep ranges confusing people, which is why I keep revisiting that topic at any one point, so then you can take what you need relative to your goals. So for the isolation movements, I do feel that training in slightly higher rep ranges is going to allow you to connect with your musculature better. It's going to allow you to increase blood flow to muscles more efficiently, which we do know will yield greater hypertrophy benefits. Obviously the loading component is the king, so in terms of mechanisms of hypertrophy, we know that lifting more weight will yield the best results, but equally there are benefits to increase blood flow to muscles. My chest isolation movement done. Again, just 2 sets. I could do more work there if my chest, I believe, would be a perceived weakness. That would be a reason to maybe add more volume to that. With the isolation work that you do, if you are going to add volume, potentially add it to areas that need more focus first. Yeah, if your chest is a perceived weakness, that's where slightly more work could yield better results. But equally, that doesn't then mean that you add a silly amount and you start doing then 5, 6 sets of chest isolation work on top of what is already 6 sets of compound work. Although, like I said, those sets aren't all direct work, there is chest stimulus coming from all of them. So the way that I look at this session now is that I've done 8 sets so far in this session, but 8 of those sets have brought stimulus to my chest. That's more than enough when you're then training it at every 4 or 5 day frequency. Now, with this side delt, which we're going on to now, that hasn't really been challenged in any of the movements that we've done so far. So this is where you need to bring maybe 4 to 5 working sets, in my opinion, specifically to that muscle, to ensure that they're getting the volume necessary they need relative to the individual development. Now, if you were a beginner and you were just doing you were just doing full body training, you probably only need 1 set of side delts, and then you could do that every other day. And if you're doing just an upper body training, you might only need 2 sets of side delts. But then once you get to push-pull legs, this is where you'll probably need 4 or 5 sets. And then with split body part training, where you're training things at maybe only once a week frequency, there's propensity there to train the side delts with 7 or 8 sets in a work session. However, the side delts are a body part that have incredible recovery capabilities. And regardless of your training split approach, they're a body part that I actually would always look to tag on at additional frequency, just because of their recovery capabilities. And then if you're having a question as to why they're a body part that is able to recover so easily, it's because it's actually really difficult to eccentrically load the side delt and cause an overwhelming amount of muscular damage. We get greater damage and greater recovery capability during eccentric movements and movements that load in the lengthened position. So obviously at the bottom of the chest press movement, we have lots of load in the lengthened position. This causes lots of damage. During a side lateral, during the eccentric, even here on a cable, once our arm is down to here, the loading is average. And with a dumbbell, there's 0. So our ability to train that body part at high frequency is pretty high. If we consider this, guys, to be essentially the first bit of exposure the side delt gets to stimulus during the training session, and then we think about the concepts that we discussed throughout the whole training session, that muscles are strong in their shortest position when they haven't received any fatigue. That means that right now our side delts have strength in that shortened, contracted position. So how can we maximally utilize that right now on a cable machine that has more of an even resistance profile? The answer is that we spend a slight bit of time in that contracted position. So for that first set, what we're going to do is we're going to pause in the contraction for just a 2 count. That's not a full 2 seconds, it's just your own standardized 2 count. It could be 2 seconds if you're happy to do that and that feels good. For me, I'll get there and I'll just go 1, 2, and I'll come back down. Second set, guys. Again, still some ability to generate some force in the shortened position. So for this set, I'm going to hold for just a 1 count. I've gone up slightly in weight, so my reps might slightly drop, but because I'm holding for a 1 count, equally they might stay. But the important aspect here is that we have slightly less strength in that shortened position, so I don't want to waste time spending too much time there, but I definitely want to ensure that I am getting a really strong contraction in that position. Next set, guys, Again, I've gone up slightly in weight, and for this one, there's going to be no hold in the shortened position. So now I'm just going to do continuous reps, keeping the form precise, making sure I'm staying on my side delt, but now at this point, no pausing there. For those sets, guys, for those reps, once I feel myself starting to throw my body into it, that's typically the set over for me. Just because when it comes to standardizing your reps, ensuring that progression is true progression, if we want to make sure that that external stimulus increase equates to a greater internal stimulus, that we make sure that we're not just getting extra reps by just chucking our body into it. So that was set 3. What we're going to do for set 4 and 5 is we're going to hop onto a machine then that has an adjustable resistance profile. Now, if you don't have something that drops off in the short, because now at this point I still have lots of strength from here to here, but much less here, then what I would do again is I would have someone just help you with forced reps just to get to that additional point, just for like the last 2 or 3 reps. I would also probably decrease the weight and then train in a different rep range. I don't have to do that because I'm going to use a machine that will then drop off and allow me to complete the reps on my own. So setting 3 now, guys, for this, where then the load is heavier in the lengthened position and then decreased in the shortened position. If I was just to start on this machine, I would have worked through probably settings 1 to start, then 5, then 3. Sometimes I would use maybe setting 4 to start, but the reason I don't love those is the same reason I said on the pec deck, in that I don't like there being very limited resistance in the start of the exercise, just because it seems just like wasted volume to me. It seems like the equivalent of junk volume. Final set, because for me, if I was trying to increase the size of my side delts, or for example when I had my side delts to their absolute biggest, 5 sets was the most amount of volume that I needed, and then I could replicate that every 4 days or every 5 days depending on when I gave myself the sleeps, depending on how you're going to set up your push-pull legs training. I have 2 preferences in the way that I would set up a push-pull leg training. It would just be your straight push, pull, legs, rest, or when you run into recovery difficulties with that, you place your rest days around either side of the leg day. So then it will look push, pull, rest, legs, rest, which seems like a lot of rest, but once you are used to training incredibly hard with high intensity, and you're then also pretty strong, those rest days are going to allow you to maximize the training sessions more so. But we'll get into the specific nuances of those setups and their varied applications in the education series when we focus on how to maneuver through each individual training split. What I'm going to do is come down slightly in weight now and just try to beat the reps that I did in that previous set. So I'm still on setting 3 on the prime. I'm still overloading in the lengthened, it's still dropping off in the shortened. But I'm just now going to try and get a couple more reps than I did for the last set by just lowering the weight slightly. So I'm going to do my tricep isolation movement, but I'm actually going to do it on a dip machine. But I'm going to try to really focus my loading specifically on my triceps. So although technically this would be considered a compound movement, the way that you execute this, you can very much on a dip machine target your triceps in an isolation fashion. Now, if the triceps are a body part for you that maybe struggles to grow, I maybe wouldn't advise this particular machine in this instance, because they're struggling to grow, possibly because your other pushing muscles are being more dominant. So then when you choose a further compound movement, you're then going to struggle to emphasize your triceps to do the work, because they've already told you that they aren't a dominant muscle, because they aren't getting the hypertrophy that your other pushing muscles are. For me, throughout my bodybuilding period, my triceps were able to grow proportionately to my chest and my shoulders. I was quite fortunate in that when I was at my biggest, there was no disparity between those body parts. So I know that if I then, from an internal stimulus perspective, focus on loading my triceps when I do this movement, I'm going to get what I need from this. Whereas if I didn't, then I would have an isolation movement on top. So factor that in when it comes to your exercise selection. The reason why I'm choosing this as well is because it allows me again to adjust the resistance profile, because my triceps are pretty fatigued in general from the work that I've done in the session. So getting them really short with a strong contraction is going to be a little bit harder. So then this machine allows me to adjust that based on kind of how they're feeling in the moment. Some sessions I find that actually I still had some fairly strong tricep contraction at the end of the session in this way, and then my resistance profile setting will reflect that. Whereas for you, you may find that actually at this point it's really hard to get your triceps fully contracted, and then you can then go to setting 3 on this machine. So for this now, with the focus of really contracting my triceps hard in an isolation fashion, I'm going to start on setting 1. Again, with this piece, guys, I actually like to dead stop this. I feel like it enables me to reconcentrate every rep on the loading of my triceps, because when you dead stop, you have to control the eccentric slightly, in that you can't just let the machine clatter. And then at the start of every rep, you can also then focus a little more on what you're trying to contract. So with the dip machine, I definitely find the dead stop variation, when I am trying to use it as an isolation movement, the most prudent choice when it comes to your execution. So again, with that machine, with that exercise, you saw at what point I couldn't complete the rep. It was in the shortened position. So then that's where I'm now, when I get to adjust the resistance profile, it means I can fully complete the rep. I've adjusted to number 3, setting 3. So this is where, with that point where I hit here, where I couldn't get it short, the machine will then drop off and allow me to get short, and equally the resistance is quite noticeable on the machine and how much there is in the length. And even on these pin loaded machines, when you start the rep, there's a lot more force that you need to produce here to get the weight going. But that's fine, because as I explained previously in the training session, that we still have a lot of force here and nowhere near as much here. So again, the absolute worst possible exercise that we could pick right now would be something like a chain dip, or any kind of press down that then biases that overloaded contraction here. So like a single armed cable push down at this point in the training session would be the worst possible option that we could choose. Something like, if you didn't have this piece, would be a single armed dumbbell overhead extension where there's lots of resistance in the stretch where we're still strong, and then basically nothing once we're overhead would be ideal. So that would be a great choice. So again, we need to make smart choices in regards to our exercises that reflect our strength profiles as sessions continue. If you were doing an arm session, the very first exercise, the very first set of the session, the best possible movement you could probably do would be a chained dip, where then, and that lockout, the overload is there, where you've got loads of lockout strength. But in a session like this, as you get on with more fatigue, that would be the worst possible. And again, the most nonsensical exercise you could do as a start point for an arm session would be the opposite. It would be that lengthened position with a single arm dumbbell overhead. That would make no sense whatsoever. So pick your exercises wisely, and that's what I'm going to try to teach you to make the most out of every single training session you do. So from the first exercise to the last exercise, you create the largest stimulus possible in your training session. So that's my session done, guys. So when we recap, we did 6 compound movements that all kind of contributed to chest, shoulder and tricep hypertrophy. We then did, but with their biases in regards to which movements you picked. Then we did 2 sets of chest isolation, 5 sets of side delt isolation, and then 2 further sets of tricep isolation. So 12 total working sets for a push session, which is very much on the low to moderate end when it comes to a training session. So that's a wrap now. All I have for me, which I'm not going to film for you guys, is I have 20 minutes on the assault bike, just to keep my cardio levels high, and then my second session of the day will be jiu-jitsu tonight. And for those that are kind of more interested in my particular training at the moment and what I'm doing, you can follow that on the Train by JP members site. For here in these sessions, my sole focus is going to be doing the right things to help you with yours. So I'm not going to give you as many insights into what I'm personally doing, because that might be a little boring for you guys, because the emphasis really is about you and it's absolutely nothing to do about me. So I hope you enjoyed this training session, and I will see you guys soon.